In this episode of IoT Unplugged, we find out about Ambient IoT. It's a technology which uses energy harvested from the environment to power and connect a network of battery-free sensors, which can then continuously and autonomously track assets. So how does it work and what exactly is it being used for? To find out, I spoke with Giampaolo Marino, Chief Strategy and Growth Officer at US-based Ambient IoT specialist Energous.
Welcome to IoT Unplugged. Today I'm with Giampaolo Marino, Senior Vice President of Strategy and Business Development at US-based wireless power solutions Energous. Giampaolo, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, please?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on this podcast. So my background has been primarily for the last 25 years in both semiconductor and system level application, focusing primarily around different market segments, consumer, industrial. And then I think probably over the last 10 years, my focus has basically been switched primarily to IoT application, Internet of Things, and specifically, Internet of Things within industrial application, logistics and manufacturing. My experience has been, again, like I mentioned, primarily in semiconductor. I started as a technical junior designer, and that's where I am today with Energous.
Great. And can you tell us a bit about Energous and what it does as a company?
Yes, indeed. Energous is a system semiconductor company that specializes and focuses primarily on developing RF-based wireless power network solution. The company has been around for, I believe, about 12 years, and during the course of these 12 years, obviously, the focus has been primarily to develop this very unique technology that enables basically to push energy, over the air, and energy that will eventually be harvested by sensors, enabling, again, those sensors to operate without the constraints of battery, thus allowing, level of automation and no maintenance at all. But, we can go into details of why that is important for Ambient IoT.
Okay, great. And Ambient IoT, I've got basic physics, GCSE, but can you talk us a bit about what it is and how it does it? Because from my very basic physics, first law of thermodynamics, you get the energy out that you put in. If you've got nothing, how can you harvest energy, basically?
Yeah, so the concept and the idea of Ambient IoT is really to bring to life everything around you, everything connected around you, but everything connected, by leveraging source of energies that are already present in the air, right? So really think about developing some very energy efficient, hardware sensors that can harvest energy from, again, RF. This is what we do at Energous, from RF energy, but they can also harvest energy from Wi-Fi, from Bluetooth. This is everything that surrounds us. And so the idea is to enable, that level of connectivity, really at the highest level, meaning this device will be able basically to provide data almost constantly. And so that data is going to be very relevant and very important to really improve, the operation in many different type of market segments. And when I say operation, obviously it's operational efficiency, whether or not you're focusing on logistics or whether or not you're focusing on retail, whether or not you're focusing on manufacturing.
How does it work? How does it actually do it? What's inside that actually does that?
Yeah, so from an energy standpoint, so what we do at Energous is we push RF energy over the air, right? And as you know, because of the law of physics, the energy, it's inversely proportional to the distance, right? You can have a 1 watt conductive here, but, 5 meters away, you're not going to receive 1 watt of conductive energy because air is dielectric and obviously it brings down, the level of energy. But I will say that today the technology has advanced so much where now we have sensors that can really operate, with microwatts worth of energy. And so if you think about what we do, if we start pushing 1 or 2 watts over the air, at a distance of about 10, 15 meters, you're still able to receive maybe milliwatts or maybe, hundreds of microwatts. And that energy is enough to basically power sensors that can operate without batteries. So how we do that is on the sensor side, you obviously have to add, some sort of receiving circuit, right? A small antenna that can receive, 900 RF energy that is propagated at 900 megahertz. This is what we do. And then, receive that signal, harvest that signal in a way and rectify that signal in a way that can be fed into a sensor element, way that can basically can power a Bluetooth connect efficiently.
Okay, so you've got the sensor at the end picking it up. Is there something pushing the energy out, or is that just already existing in the atmosphere?
The energy is pushed from our wireless power network technology, and this is basically what we have been developing and energies, over the last 5 years, right? It's basically system or transmitters in the likes of Wi-Fi, right? You have Wi-Fi access point is exactly the same, but instead of pushing Wi-Fi out, we basically push RF energy out, and so we do that probably in one of the best efficient way possible. And so again, as we push energy through our network, that energy is being it's picked up by very energy efficient sensors that are able to basically collect the energy, power themselves up and provide constant flow of data, into the system. And that data is essential, for a lot of customers out there, to make the right level of decisions. I always say that ambient IoT, what it does, it adds a layer of intelligence, obviously through data and automation, that today it's critical to improve efficiency across many different type of market segments: manufacturing, logistics, retail, pharmaceutical, you just name it.
Okay, and well, I'll name it and it'll be retail. So could you tell us a bit about how it actually works? I've got two different tags, I believe. Could you tell us how the sensors actually work, as in what the application is like, what happens?
Yes. So think of the sensor as sort of like, this is a word that is often used, right? It's a digital twin. The sensor can be associated to a specific asset. And now that sensor creates a digital twin of that asset. Now suddenly that asset is digitized. And now through the sensor, you can monitor the asset as it travels. Let's talk about retail. As it travels across a retail chain, supply chain operation. The asset goes from a grocery distribution centers, can be monitored as it gets loaded into a trailer. It will be monitored along the route of the trailer. It will be monitored as it is delivered to the store. So, now constantly and with very high data flow, how this asset is moving. And the beauty of ambient IoT is you can receive that level of data with 100% automation. You don't need any sort of like manual scanning, right? You don't need any sort of operator, monitoring this asset. This asset, once it is associated with a sensor, will basically provide data constantly. And that data, it's collected through the Energis wireless power network. And then it's pushed into the cloud, through our network solution.
And can it be anywhere? Or are there geographical limits to how far it can be from the Energis, from the output?
From the Energis transmitter. So typically today, we're working with different technology. One sensor technology that we're working with, it's Wiliot. They have developed extremely high energy efficient tags that are capable, obviously, of harvesting energy from our network and obviously, collecting data like in the likes of what I mentioned before. So just to give you an example, with a sensor element in the likes of Wiliot, we are capable of achieving up to 25 to 35 feet of distance between the transmitter and the receiver. Also, one other thing that I want to mention is one transmitter, one Energis transmitter, which is part of this wireless power network solution, can power thousands of tags within the line of sight of the right? So this is not a one-to-one connection. This is a one transmitter to many sensors out there that are in the line of sight of the transmitter. And that basically, so the combination of powering thousands of sensors and the combination of achieving 25, 30 feet distance between the receiver and the transmitter gives us what we call scalability into many different type of applications, whether or not this is retail or logistic. I mean, these applications, when you look at the complexity of these applications, are extremely complex. There is big areas that we need to cover across this operation. So you need scale, you need distance, you need constant data flow with a distance that makes sense to cover, I don't know, warehouses in the likes of 500 meters long by 150 meter wide. And so, if you don't have scale, obviously, you don't have deployment, but we are there already today.
And what are the practical applications for the retailers that you've actually worked with? Are the tags being put on pallets? Are they being put on actual stock on the shelf? Why is it useful? What does it actually do?
I would say that the practical application of, again, this new category of ambient IoT tags or sensors, let's generalize it, are many. It could be, for instance, within retail, could be cold chain application where you're monitoring basically food as it travels from grocery distribution centers all the way to the store. And you want to ensure that the food that you're monitoring, it's always in a temperature controlled environment every single time. It could be asset that you're monitoring, as, the retailer, basically it's moving asset, from stores to stores or from distribution centers, to stores. Sometimes it could be high value asset. It could be logistic applications, right? Where now you're monitoring everything that runs through, the logistic facility, and could be asset, in packaged in different ways. I mean, you just named it. It could be pharmaceutical application. It could be manufacturing. So again, the end goal here is basically asset tracking and of asset across, different type of industries.
And when you actually do it, and could you give us a sort of physical example? I know you've worked with some really big retailers. Do they get their suppliers to put the tag on the pallets and then send it, monitor the stock as it's being shipped around? Or how does it actually work?
Yes, at a high level, typically the tag is associated, with an asset first. Right. Once that association has been done, because it's very important, now you're digitizing that asset. That asset has a specific ID that now I can monitor through, again, the cloud. Once that asset has been associated on an item level or at a pallet level, then basically can be monitored across the life cycle of the asset through, the customer operation. So it's a very simple way. It's sort of like RFID. You did the same thing with RFID technology. You're applying RFID tags on an asset, on a product, and then basically, that asset, that RFID tag, which has a unique ID, it's capable of being tracked as, the asset moves across the operation of the customer application. In essence, ambient IoT tags operate the same way. The difference, though, is with ambient IoT is you eliminate completely, any sort of manuality in basically monitoring the asset. Once the tag has been associated, to the asset, that tag basically always provides automatic pieces of information. It doesn't require any sort of scanning. It provides you data through a BLE connection, and that data is picked up by Energous Wireless Power Network, and then the network pushes the data all the way up into the cloud in a very automated way.
I see, but a lot of retailers already have RFID tags in operation. So why should they then have ambient IoT tags as well? Why isn't that sort of doubling up?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. I always like to say that RFID is the foundational layer of asset tracking. It's here to stay and provides a very solid foundation. But now, if you want to add the intelligence and automation on top of RFID, you need ambient IoT. So think of ambient IoT as that layer of intelligence, that layer of automation, right, that you need on top of RFID to really run your operation at close to 100% efficiency. And the reason why I say that is also because, again, RFID is a passive technology. Well, you can claim, well, there is also active RFID tags. Completely agree with that. But again, an active RFID tag will probably give you a piece of information every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. An ambient IoT tag can give you a piece of information every 30 seconds, every minute, every 5 seconds. Why? Because I don't have a battery that basically limits my power supply, my power capacity of the tag. Because I have a network that provides me constant energy. I have a tag that is harvesting energy all the time. So that tag is capable of giving you a piece of information every 5 seconds, even every second if we need to, right? And that's the fundamental difference between our ambient IoT and RFID. So, or even active RFID, for instance. So, and again, it's the constant data, right? That is critical sometimes, to receive, because problems always happen when there is lack of data or when there is dead times where you're not tracking the asset. Unfortunately, RFID has those dead zones. If I scan an RFID tag, I get a piece of information. But to get me another piece of information, I need to rescan the tag again. Sometimes, between two scans, it might lapse. There is basically an hour or 2 hours that might lapse. And within those 2 hours, that's where the problem happened. And that's the fundamental difference between the two technologies.
I suppose so. But RFID is very popular with retailers because, well, principally because it's quite cheap to install. How much does ambient IoT cost? How long does it take to get your money back on it?
I think, what I've seen generally in terms of on the ambient IoT tags, I've seen basically a cost come down to, double digit cents. So the gap between RFID and ambient IoT is becoming closer and closer and closer. And so I think, a lot of the retailers now, as this gap is closing, are willing to use ambient IoT because they see the level of ROI that this technology brings, to their operation. Sometimes improving efficiency in their operation from 90%, to 97% will mean saving tens of millions of dollars, right? That's basically where the ROI starts to kick in and make a lot of sense, for a lot of the retailers that we've been talking to. If they can start saving, that delta 5 to 10 million, 15 million that they lose every year because inefficiency of their supply chain, then ambient IoT makes complete sense for them.
And is it really a play on improving the supply chain efficiency, or is it on reducing labour costs? Because a lot of the time people say this sort of thing's done to save shop workers time, or perhaps to save retailers quite a lot of money in terms of employing shop workers. But what sort of roles do you think it could free up, for retailers?
I think it's both. I think it's not just obviously improving efficiency across supply chain is extremely important because a lot of retailers, a lot of logistic companies that we talk to, unfortunately, they have problems, within their operation. They have problems of product diversion. They have problems of spoilage, right? That cost them millions of dollars. So I think, that is very, very important when we talk about ambient IoT. But also, it's labor cost. Again, now you have a technology that it's basically labor free, almost, with highest level of automation. And so when you bring the two together, it makes total sense, for them to start adopting this technology because the ROIs are there and the ROIs are very clear. So again, I will say it's both labor, reduction of labor, high level of automation, and is improvement of operational efficiency.
Okay, you make this sound great, and it sounds like there are lots of practical applications. But my question, and I ask this a lot of times, is if it's so good, why isn't everyone doing it already?
No, it's a fantastic question. I think it's got to do with, it's a new technology. And so every new technology that we have experienced in the past sort of have to go through technology adoption curve. And which is kind of like bell-shaped, curve where, you see the inception phase of the technology where maybe you have one or two key customers wanting to adopt the technology, and experiencing the technology first, figuring out the benefit of the technology, and being what we call early adopters. And then as this technology gets deployed through the early adopters, suddenly you start seeing, the curve exponentially moving up into basically product adoption and maturity. I think, that's where we are today with ambient IoT. We are sort of like, crossing the chasm. We have obviously very success stories through some really big early adopters. And I will say that 2026 will be the beginning of a lot more customers jumping on this technology because obviously the benefits are so tangible that it's hard to basically keep it quiet.
And are there any particular drivers you think are happening this year? Is tariff or supply chain volatility? Are there any sort of push factors that you think particularly relevant to 2026?
I think it definitely has a role, although the tariff, I don't think are really affecting, the adoption of the technology. I think the biggest role is, I believe, there's a big talk about AI, right? Everybody nowadays is talking about AI. Well, there is no AI if there is no data that can feed AI. And ambient IoT is all about data. Ambient IoT is all about feeding basically, AI, with data in a very automated way that is very, very efficient. And there's no technology today that can do that. So to me, AI is the biggest driver of ambient IoT adoption. Because again, they're both directly proportional to each other. Ambient IoT feeds the data, AI injects the data, and then obviously trains the model to become much more effective. So I think that's the biggest driver, in my opinion, of ambient IoT, probably over the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, and finally, before I let you go, just what innovations or improvements in ambient IoT do you expect to see over the next 3 or 5 years?
I will say I expect to see higher level of efficiencies that are going to be reached by receiving device, right? We've been talking about sensors. I think sensors are going to become more and more efficient. The circuits around the sensors that are powering those sensors are going to become much more efficient. So I expect that level of efficiency to extend further the range between a transmitter and a receiver. Maybe today we're talking about 25 feet. maybe in a year or two, we're going to start talking about 50 feet, 75 feet, right? So that level of efficiency, I think, is going to be driving scale, and scale basically is going to drive adoption of ambient IoT across a lot of other industry, not just the one that we've been discussing today.
Great. Giampaolo Marino, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me here.